So for target 4.2, it asks us to solve the following quadratic equations by factoring. And in part A, it gives us the equation x squared plus x equals 30. Now, if we're solving this by factoring, that means we're going to have a quadratic with x squared terms, x terms, and number terms. And whenever we have that and we're trying to solve, we need to make sure that one side of the equation is equal to 0. So what we're going to do first is we need to get the right-hand side equal to 0. So to do that, I'm going to take away 30 from both sides. And that's going to result in x squared plus x minus 30, because there was no other number term besides the minus 30. And that is all equal to 0. Now, once I get here, in order to factor it, we look at the last term, and we need to start by finding the factors of that last term. So the factors are 1 and 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and then 5 and 6. If you multiply those numbers, those pairs together, you will get 30. Now, the next step is we need to pay attention that it asks us to multiply to get negative 30 when we factor our terms, but we also have to add those same two factors and get positive 1. Now, it's important that we look at the negative symbol in front of the 30, because that means that one of the two terms has to be positive and one has to be negative. That's the only way you can multiply two numbers and get a negative, is if one is positive and one is negative. So I know that one has to be positive, one is negative, but I'm not sure which just yet. So to understand which one has to be positive, which one has to be negative, we look to the second part where we see that we have to add 1. The two numbers have to add to 1. So what we're going to do out of that is, if they add to give me a positive number, that means when I combine those two, the bigger one must be positive. Otherwise, if we had, for instance, like if it was, let's say it was 1 and negative 30, if I add those together, I get a negative number. And even if we go down to the closest two, 5 and 6, if 6 was negative, 5 plus negative 6 would be negative 1. So that tells me that since that numbers add to a positive value, the bigger of the two numbers needs to be positive. So the only pair that will match up, if we go back and we make sure all the small ones are negative here, the only pair that's going to match up is if we choose negative 5 and positive 6, because negative 5 plus 6 is 1, negative 5 times 6 is negative 30. So we write out our factors, x minus 5 times x plus 6 equals 0. And then to get our answers, the actual solution, don't just stop there. Don't stop at just factoring. We need to make sure that we figure out what x values we could plug into each of those parentheses in order to get one of those terms equal to 0. So if I have x minus 5 and I want to know what would I plug in for x to get 0, that's just positive 5. So I have x equals 5. And then for the second one, I have x equals negative 6. And then our two solutions are thus x equals 5 and x equals negative 6. And we move on to the second problem. Now, we could check this answer real quick before you go on to part B. To check it, you simply take your x values, so take 5 for instance, and we would plug those back into the original problem. So I could plug 5 into the original equation, and I would have 5 squared plus 5 equals 30. And if we check that, 25 plus 5 does in fact give me 30. And then I could do the same thing with negative 6. If I do negative 6 squared plus negative 6, we want to know if that equals 30. Negative 6 squared is positive 36. If you take away 6, you do in fact get 30. So both answers work out, and we move on to the next problem.